Hi, everybody. This is Hyperwave, and this is going to be quite a different vlog if you saw the tweets and also this title. Tyler woke me up. This is a disclaimer and the truth. He's going to laugh at me in a second. Ooh, and there we go on my phone. We're already starting that way. He woke me up in the morning yesterday with the craziest messages, completely full of philosophy, a little bit of libertarianism, a lot of libertarianism, finance. It was insanity. I fully admit that I went salsa dancing way too long the night before, and I said, Tyler, we are putting this back a day because my brain is not working. So now it is back a day, and the crazy man has a lot that he wants to say. He's very passionate today. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So as an overview, there's a lot that's going to be happening. There's a lot that's going to be talked about, but it's also going to be very actionable. Now, the question is, how can we make a discussion about libertarianism, Austrian economics, the early philosophers of, monetarism, Keynesianism, the discussion around modern monetary theory is obviously massive. Inflation, central banking, gold standard. We're at an inflection point in traditional markets, pure Jeffersonian democracy, and then naturally Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's role from the perspective of decentralization and centralization, why we're adamant on making sure that shitcoin projects die, but actionable in the sense of how does all of this play into very practical things of cutting the BS and should I trade Boeing? How should I set up my IRA? And with Bitcoin, that we now have complete voting power for ourselves. Centralization versus decentralization, money management. Ty, start us off, and how the heck are we going to get to something actionable and related to Lucid investment strategies from this crazy title that you had me put up?
Yeah, that's a great overview. And I'm sure nobody followed it. Because you and I had a long talk about all of this stuff. But to me, I guess I just got tired of all of these tweets people are saying that Tyler and Leah know nothing about Bitcoin. Therefore, don't listen to them. Don't listen to their theories about where prices are going, hyperwaves and all that kind of stuff. Tyler's just this old guy who, has been locked into a system of finance and economics and trading using asset classes that are no longer relevant. And Bitcoin is completely different. And therefore, you can't use any fundamental analysis or technical analysis on it. I just got tired of all that nonsense. And so I've been thinking for a long time about why it is that I am such a Bitcoin maximalist. And those that disagree with the fact that I believe that the price is still going down and will go down for some time, are just completely missing the point. I think the one very bright, shining light, and not as an asset class, but as a philosophical, as an economic, as a financial, as a political change agent, is Bitcoin, not cryptocurrencies, not alternative currencies, not alternative projects, Bitcoin and Bitcoin alone. Now, what is the best way for me to be able to explain why we believe so much in Bitcoin? And the way I came up with is this convoluted thing that I call decentralization versus centralization. The people in the crypto space miss the point about centralization and decentralization because you are, in general, looking at it myopically, only from the perspective of Bitcoin. and in the wars between the centralized, purely centralized, and pure decentralized part of the crypto world. I want to start this discussion from a much, much broader view of centralization and decentralization. And for those of you that have listened to our previous vlogs, we spent a lot of time on one particular vlog that I couldn't find, but it's in there somewhere, about this idea of the dialectic. It's an idea about taking two extremes and finding a synthesis between them. And that's the purest form of centralization and decentralization. And it started out as a philosophical concept where someone would state a thesis and then it would be argued about until someone finally took the antithesis of that statement, the exact opposite in every way, and then tried to build a philosophy around that antithesis in order to combat the pros and the cons of the thesis. And then others got involved in that. And the most obvious are the dialectic imperative that had to do with basically government and its role, as well as in philosophy, that then branched out into the Communist Manifesto that talked about a specific type of dialectic having to do with property rights, and more importantly, having to do with this topic of centralization versus decentralization. We're not going to go into all that stuff, but I just wanted to set the boundaries a little bit so we could bring it down from the ethereal down to the philosophical, down to the economic, down to the financial, down to the practical, and show what Bitcoin really means in that entire process, not just who is more decentralized, Ethereum or Litecoin or Digibyte, Bitcoin or all the others. We can debate that forever, but clearly the people in this space, this tiny, tiny group of people who are in the millions, but not in the billions or the 7.5 billion, a tiny, tiny portion of people in the world want to have that debate. They don't care who's right or who's wrong. They're not going to give it the time necessary to understand why maximalists or Bitcoin standard bearers are so adamant that within this little culture, with 5,000 of these little games going on one side and Bitcoin on the other, that there is a distinct difference having to do with this question of centrality, centralization versus decentralization. So now I'm going to take it a little more ethereal just for a second, away from cryptocurrency, and talk about financial markets in general, all asset classes. And for those of you too immature or too young, or dare I say it, too intellectually dishonest to really think about all asset classes not being in any way different than each other, including the cryptocurrency class, because they all revolve on the exact same basis, which is human behavior. Every one of them. Don't tell me that Bitcoin is different after watching it go from a penny to $20,000 and back to 3,700, now 3,900. And don't tell me that because it ran from 3,200 to 3,900, ooh, the bottom's in, we're going to the moon. You don't get it. What you don't get is the movement of asset classes is purely based on democracy, people voting to buy, stay out, or sell, to be short, to stay out, or to be long. And the decision to do any one of those three things is based on all the evidence in the world that people will open their minds up to, both fundamentally and technically, to understand what everyone else in the world is thinking, not what you are thinking. It does not matter what you think about Bitcoin. It does not matter what you think about Boeing or Tesla or the US stock market or the Turkish lira. It only matters in terms of the price movement, the value that everybody else puts on it at that particular moment. You are one of billions that have a vote. And you either are going to vote on the side of the majority or on the side of the minority. And if you're on the side of the minority, you are going to be in a position of loss. If you are on the side of the majority, you will be in a position of gain. That includes everything, including Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and Boeing and Tesla and gold. If you don't accept that premise, you should not be putting your hard-earned dollars into any of those things, because it is that simple. The reason technical analysis works is it cuts through all the fundamental babble, all the fundamental ratios, all the marketing, all of the people talking their own book in public, from Elon Musk to Novogratz, to anybody who is talking because of their book, not because of the essence of the asset class they're talking about. Okay, what does all of that mean practically? Well, I'm now going to jump up 3 levels, up around 10,000 feet, and look at what's going on politically around the world. And I'm going to use as an example libertarianism. Now, we're not going to get into a deep discussion of where it came from, who was involved in it, and why it's divided itself up into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of subcategories. We're going to talk about libertarianism as the middle ground between centralization and decentralization. And when I use those terms, I mean in a almost metaphysical sense, which does not exist in the human sphere. There is no such thing as complete centralization. We get close with certain dictators. For periods of time, we've got very close through royalty. In various institutions, very large religious institutions, we get very close over the centuries to complete centralization, but we never, ever have pure centralization or decentralization. In the middle of those extremes, we have this thing called libertarianism, which comes from the French liberté, and was coined back in the 1700s through a number of documents that meant one thing and then quickly evolved and devolved into many, many other things. Now, for those of you who believe you are libertarians, I submit that no two of you believe in the same things about that term. There are two extremes to libertarianism. One is left libertarianism, and one is right libertarianism. And over the last 200 years, the definition has constantly shifted and been taken over by various groups. Originally, a number of left libertarians in the 1800s and early 1900s would be considered today politically on the left side of the spectrum, having to do with the way the world looks at left versus right. But over the years, that has changed dramatically and gone from far left to mid left to right in the center to mid right to far right. And those calling themselves libertarians today fall somewhere on that enormous spectrum. And Lee and I were throwing terms around before we started. Some of you might be aware of these, some of you might not, but on the left is such things as anarcho-communism, syndicalism, basically having to do with syndicates or small groups, oligopolies, basically, that are libertarian within that group. And as long as that group is doing what they want to, they don't involve other people. Mutualism, egoism, anti-paternalism, anarcho-feminism, all of those are names of groups of people that have certain ideological thinking about this term libertarianism. And each one of them can be subdivided into another 100 parts and another 100 parts until you get down to you, the individual. What is it you believe? Why do you believe this person, and this person, but not this person, and this person, all of who call themselves libertarians? Okay, on the other side of the spectrum, and the most common in the world today, arguably, is the right side of the liberal or libertarian movement. And that includes such things as minarchism, anarcho-capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, private property rights. And you hear people on the right, particularly in the United States, because the right in terms of libertarianism came from the US. And it didn't begin until 1955, which was the first time that term was used in the US, after 150 years being used in Europe, mainly from the left side. And I won't go into who and when and why, but basically it was in 1955 that Dean Russell made this statement: many of us call ourselves liberals. And it is true that the word liberal once described persons who respected the individual and feared the use of mass compulsion. But the leftists have corrupted that once proud term to identify corrupted that once proud term to identify their program of more government oversight, ownership of property, and more controls over persons. And therefore, what we are left with today is this battle in Washington, D.C. over people trying to pin terms on their thoughts. We are liberal, you are conservative. Therefore, we are left and you are right. And in the middle of that is this poor group of people called libertarianism or libertarians who borrow from both of those sides, because both of those sides offer a synthesis of what is practical, a synthesis of those things that actually work on a day-to-day basis. The extremes never do. The extremes always fail. Take the most extreme position philosophically, and you will find a dead-end road. Take its antithesis philosophically, and you find a dead-end road. What you find practically in terms of countries and governance and policies and economics, and yes, even religious theological beliefs, fall somewhere in between. Give me one extreme and I will name the other extreme, and then let's look at it practically, and you'll find something in between. What in the world is this idiot talking about? What I'm talking about now, we're going to bring down to the practical side of Bitcoin being a Bitcoin standard bearer, as opposed to what is developing within the crypto space. And now we're not just talking about how many people are involved in the project and who can make decisions, because there is no more extreme in any institution, philosophical thought, economic institution, or economic thought than what Bitcoin provides. There is nothing more democratic ever devised, and it could not have been devised if it wasn't for mass communication, computer chips, the internet, and the need on the part of everyone that understands anything about economics to try to reverse the movement of centralization to fewer and fewer people, resulting in tremendous diversion of wealth to a very, very few and away from the very, very many. That's what all of these other theoretical, philosophical, economic, political theories over the last 200-300 years have been designed to do. Find something that actually works between the extremes. Today, you have heard Leah and I talk ad nauseum about the problem with world debt and credit. That comes from one source: the centralization of wealth and finance to the very few in the form of central banks, the form of the IMF, the form of world banks, and ultimately the form of the Federal Reserve. That is what Bitcoin is the antithesis of. Every other project in cryptocurrency is one step closer to the thesis that the centralization of finance is necessary and is being handled properly, and they have not overstepped their bounds. Every other project in the crypto space is a step closer to that extreme. Now, I'm not stupid enough to believe that they are stepping very close to that extreme. I'm simply making the point that Bitcoin, and only Bitcoin, can carry the mantle of being antithetical to this problem we're trying to solve. Everyone else waters it down. Now, let me be very practical. I've said over and over again that the thing that has brought me to believe in Bitcoin, and I am not saying it's going to succeed, I'm saying it has the potential to succeed and become a world currency or part of a group of ideas that include it in it, as a solution to the problem of the centralization of finance and economics. And I can see it as the only solution that doesn't carry baggage with it. That doesn't mean it's going to work. Leah and I got into a great discussion before we went on the air about how every one of the extremes fails. And something in the middle, somewhere, is more acceptable to the majority of people, which is the definition of democracy. Jeffersonian democracy or pure democracy, or let's not get into lingo. Let's just think about what we're saying. Think about the difference between being totally decentralized, which is impossible, to being totally centralized, which is also impossible, to something in between that actually works for the time we're in, the institutions we have, the education, the political realities. There is something in between those two extremes. Okay. Why do I keep saying this about Bitcoin? Maybe I'm wrong. But all the work I've done since 2012, trying to mine, trying to get into the crypto system, the crypto economy, the crypto ecosystem, trying to understand it, trying to understand the forces involved in it, I keep stumbling with what the ecosystem offers me. The only time that's not true is when I only think about Bitcoin and what it stands for. So once again, I am going to go over my list of things that distinguish that project from every other project. And it starts with human beings. The people that work on the original blockchain, the person or people, the man or the woman, the group that wrote the white paper, had a vision where by simply laying down very simple rules, nobody would be able to change it. And nobody would be able to change the price other than you and me, other than you and Leah, other than Leah and me, other than the three of us and everybody else in the world. We could do it by voting. We could do it with no government interference. We could do it without boards of trustees, boards of advisors, vice presidents, presidents, or CEOs. We could do it without founders. We would know that no one was going to change the basic mechanism that allows Bitcoin to be theoretically understood, be mined into existence, be voted on by all parties involved up to 51%, and through mass adoption become as close to pure democracy as has ever been theoretically devised. And that only happened 10 years ago. And people wonder why, after 200 years of debating libertarianism or democracy or communism or socialism or Jeffersonian democracy or where we are today in the United States, after all of that theoretical debate, something comes along out of nowhere that's only 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 pages long, depending on what the font size is, and offers a solution to the problems of politics, finance, economics, and more importantly, the value of the individual. the value of someone living in sub-Saharan Africa that has nothing but can participate in this new thing called Bitcoin. And I'm not going to say cryptocurrency, I'm going to say Bitcoin and Bitcoin only, because all of those forms of centralization that I just talked about, CEOs and presidents and founders and first members and people that pre-mine things and change the rules and change the total number of tokens at a whim, or fork off and leave the debris behind and do it again, and fork off and leave that debris behind and leave it again, and do it over and over. That is the definition of every other project other than Bitcoin. I am, Leah is, Tone Vase is, Giacomo is, Willie Woo is, Jimmy Song is, Van Zen is, Ugly Old Goat is, a Bitcoin standard bearer. And we all have our reasons why. All I'm trying to do in this very brief exercise is to try to put it into perspective from a much broader point of view than just fighting among ourselves. Is Litecoin as good as Ethereum? Is this as good as that? Okay, what does that have to do with buying and selling Bitcoin? I have said repeatedly that I have never bought a Bitcoin. I have bought a large percentage of my wealth. I have put it into GBTC. I made that decision because the exchanges that are unregulated, the people that build mechanisms to move from banks to exchanges to wallets to cold storage, back through that maze using all kinds of ridiculous secret handshakes and special languages and special development codes that every other developer does not agree with and will find reasons not to. None of that has to do with Bitcoin. None of that has anything to do with the theoretical possibilities and probabilities of this new experiment. And that's why, until I personally, as an investment advisor to third parties or a discretionary manager over their money, am not ready, as we sit here today at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, ready to put a penny into that system. I have full confidence in those people that are working day and night to streamline what it takes to move money through the original Bitcoin structure and its blockchain. No other blockchain, only its blockchain. I've got a high degree of confidence that that day is coming, in which I will have no problem telling our followers, our listeners, our consulting clients, our discretionary clients, it is time to go ahead and move into this market in a big way. But I cannot do that with all of the baggage that comes along with all these pseudo projects, trying to sort out which are the good ones and which are the bad ones, knowing absolutely that not a single one of them can take the theoretical or the practical place of Bitcoin. You can't add to it, you can only subtract from it. Okay, I've got 40 years of experience looking into how to buy or sell Boeing or Tesla, how to make that decision from a traditional fundamental background taught by very large brokerage firms and money managers, starting with Dean Witter, moving to Loeb Rhodes, taken over by Shearson, taken over by American Express, setting up my own money management firm, setting up my own research firms, and then going to work on Wall Street with all of that knowledge to actually manage money for other people. In doing that, I spent far more than 10 years getting into the details of what the regulators would let us do and would not let us do. What was the most efficient way to interact with an exchange? What was the most efficient way to interact with leverage on various exchanges? On the New York Stock Exchange, you can only do 2-to-1, 50%. As you move into options, you can get into many times that amount. As you get into futures, you can get into many, many more times that amount. As you get into some of the exchanges that have popped up all over the world, in the Middle East, in Asia, throughout Europe, you can get 1,000-to-1 leverage on various exchanges. I have cautioned people, do not put trades in to buy or sell, to put in limit orders or stop limit orders or any other kind of things. Good till the day, good for the week, good for the month, good until canceled orders. Don't do any of those things until you completely understand what that specific exchange will let you do and won't let you do, what their hours are, when they're closed down. Do they have limits of how far a price can move up or down? They're all different every place you go. When you move into brokerage firms that also allow you to trade and to leave your money with them, they each have different rules. E-Trade, Schwab, Fidelity, Ameritrade, TD Waterhouse, on and on and on, just in this country. Around the world, they all have different things. Fidelity, Schwab, Interactive Brokers have got offices all over the world. But depending on who you are, what country you are in, and what country you are trading on those exchanges, those brokerage accounts all have different rules. You can buy things at Schwab in the US that at Schwab over in Europe you cannot buy. Same thing with Fidelity, same thing with Interactive Brokers. There are rules in each country what you can do with your retirement accounts. Now, why am I going into all of that? Because it gets to the heart of what I'm talking about centralization versus decentralization. If the Bitcoin/crypto world remains completely unregulated, I won't touch it. Because the people that are regulating it have no one looking over their shoulders. And if you've listened to Giacomo and Leah and Tone and Jimmy Song talk about the news of the day in the crypto world, you know what I'm talking about. You know that exchange after exchange after exchange, you know that hackers have gotten into every form of transportation of your money between each of the elements within the system. And the reason for that is it's unregulated. It is not purely centralized or decentralized. It needs to be far more centralized. We need the regulators because they know what they're doing and they make a lot of mistakes, but not nearly the number of mistakes and errors that are made by the unregulated. Another definition of the unregulated is anarchy. In a very narrow sense, because Leah will scold me about the sense that I'm using. She knows a lot more about anarchy than I do. When I am talking about anarchy, I mean letting the strong do anything they want to the weak. Those in the know to do anything they want to those that are ignorant. Those that are experts to do anything they want to the beginners. And that's the definition of the crypto ecosystem and has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Okay. What does all of this have to do with the bigger picture of your wealth? Socrates and I have some philosophical differences between what is the most important elements of our life. And one of the things I have said that to me it is time. Socrates believes it's number 3 on his list, and there are other things that come first. And we can have great debates about that. But besides time, family to me is right up at the top. Without time, you end up neglecting family. And I don't mean just family, meaning husband and wife and children. I mean family, meaning your friends, the people you associate at church, the people that have like beliefs that you do, the people that you can share with and learn from, and they can learn from you and share with you. That's what I mean by family. To me, that is right up there with anything else. I haven't mentioned wealth yet, but I'm about to. Somewhere on the list in the top 1 or 2 or 3 things in my life, everybody's has their own way of looking things. But unfortunately, you are listening to me right now, so you've got to listen to what I believe is wealth. And by wealth, I don't mean having a lot of money. By wealth, I mean taking your experience, taking your education, taking your morals and your ethics and your metaphysical background that you learned on your own, that you were taught to by your family and your friends and those you associate with. That is the greatest form of wealth. And when you put time on top of that, on top of your character, on top of what you believe in, what you understand to be true, time is this weird element that either limits you or delimits you in terms of you being able to progress by turning that time into wealth through not only your education, but through what you do to earn money. Are you a writer? Are you a doctor? Are you a professional? Are you a laborer? Are you scratching out an existence? It doesn't matter. Each one of you, everybody, is in control of those 3 things: their time, their family, and finally their wealth. If it's $100, there have been times in my life when $100 was more than all the money in the world. And there's been times in my life where having millions of dollars in the bank was unimportant to me. It has nothing to do with the size of your account. It has to do with what you do with that, how you use it, how wisely you manage that process between your time, your family, and this thing that you turn into what we talk about as cash or fiat money. And let's keep it at that level for now, because that's what we're mostly paid in. Bitcoin is changing that and will change that, hopefully in the future, because of all the other things that it will bring with it, if we can do that. Now, in that trinity of yourself, your time, your family, and your wealth, with the definitions that I've just given, it is completely up to you, no one else, not your partner, not your family, just you, to decide what you're going to do with that balance. The balance of those three things. Things can get in the way. Addictions can get in the way. Egotism can get in the way. Thinking only about yourself and not about those around you. The love of money, not money, but the love of money can get in your way. The fear of losing can get in your way. What is it about us all together, other than what I just talked about in terms of individualism, pure democracy, having one vote for one thing, being able to decide for yourself, not being dictated to by larger organizations, larger structure, larger groups that tend to move towards groupthink, but just you yourself? What is it that attempts to corral the baser instincts? It is centralization. It is not decentralization. It is a group of people that you have the ability to put in power to represent you, and you have the power to take those people out and put somebody in that is more consistent with the way you view things. If you get to the point where the structure that you have built begins to take on its own life form so that it becomes overly centralized, that it begins trying to take from you to give to someone else, as opposed to you deciding to give to someone else. If it gets to the point where you begin drifting away from that libertarian middle, however you want to define it, over to one side or the other, to the left or to the right, to pure communism or pure fascism, to pure centralization or total decentralization. As soon as that ball, that pointer, begins to move one way or the other, big changes are about to happen. And what Leah and I have been attempting to say for the past year is, let's take our focus away from the mundane and the microscopic, put on glasses that aren't myopic, don't believe in one thing completely without listening or understanding to all the other things that need to be taken into account, and understand that what the world has just gone through from 1960 until 121 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:22 today, is the largest shift in the history of civilization. From not being able to speak to each other the way we are today, back in 1960, without having pen pals or picking up a telephone that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't, on a one-to-one basis, we can now talk to each other in TED Talks, through radio, through the internet, instantaneously to millions of people. And it's broadcast instantaneously all over the world. Technology is the force behind decentralization and pure democratization. It goes across borders. Those that attempt to hold on to power by limiting that technology have to put up bigger and bigger barriers that keep their people more and more insulated until it falls apart. We saw that in the Soviet Union. I believe we are going to see that in China. I believe that we have seen it in the Middle East, in Libya, in Uganda, in many African countries, where because people can listen and hear from everybody and not just the one in power or the 3 in power or the 50 in power or the people sitting around the open market committee at the Federal Reserve dictating to the World Bank and the IMF what is gospel and then spreading it out. Along with that communication, along with that breakdown of what really are all of these crazy theories of politics and who should be in power and royalty, we still have royalty today in some of the biggest developed countries in the world. That's all going away. And in my opinion, it's going away because of 2 things: technology and its subset, communications, and Bitcoin. Not crypto, but Bitcoin. Now, how and where we get to that Valhalla, that heaven, that paradise on earth that is theoretically possible, and everyone has been striving for it in their own feeble ways until today, where there are real solutions to these problems, I don't know, nor does anyone else. And the reason Leah and I have to go slowly on what we say about this unbelievable thing called Bitcoin is because we find ourselves attempting to sing the praises of Bitcoin while it is chained to these lead anchors called altcoins, which caused it to stop going up when it did in a thing that I call a hyperwave, which I would not have known anything about if I hadn't been studying it for 40 years and someone told me that Bitcoin was forming one of these things and I got interested in it. That's the only reason Lee and I are here. I'm not here to teach people about hyperwave. I'm not here to teach people about consensus or give you my experience about the traditional markets. I'm basically retired. But I believe so deeply in this thing called Bitcoin that for the last year that we've been doing this, we just celebrated our first anniversary of logging. And I'm so proud of the fact that I have this partner that has made this all happen, that we've been able to get in front of you with our weird ideas. And many of you have responded very positively to it. But the essence of all of this, to understand what I'm saying and why I'm saying it about this one thing, Bitcoin, I've had to for a year say, no, don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. It's going down. It's going down. And I still believe it's going down further. I'm fully confident that we are going to win our bet of where this price is going to go of $1,500 before it gets to $6,500. I would like to win that. It doesn't do anything to hyperwave theory. If I don't win it, I would be wildly happy if we lose it, because Bitcoin is starting up again and is on its way to 100,000 and then to 500,000, then to 1,000,000. And in my next article, I'm going to talk about $5 million Bitcoin and $15,000 gold hand in hand as a possible solution to this overall problem. But forget all that stuff. If you want to understand what Leah and I have been trying to say about Bitcoin, then you need to understand why it is I was able to buy Bitcoin and sell it at the top and stay out ever since. And there's only one reason for me personally, and that is this thing called Hyperwave. And I know it sounds like we're shilling Hyperwave, but I wanted to put it in a context that I am in a position now where I am more than happy to tell everyone in the world about Hyperwave. We're coming out with a book about Hyperwave. I will assure you that once it comes out in great detail with many, many examples, that you will still need to hear a summary of what that book says, because it goes off into a lot of detail in a lot of areas. And we've left it to Socrates to help Lee and I walk through that to make sure the book says everything that it needs to say. But my last couple of minutes, I just want to say that we are teaching another webinar on Hyperwave. Think of it as a way to understand everything I've just said about why I am so confident about Bitcoin. Think of it as a way of getting into the depth of why Bitcoin is where it is and all the other cryptos are not. Think of it as a way to understand why I believe we are going to see Bitcoin at enormous levels relative to other assets and other asset classes. But if you believe, as I do and Leah does, that Bitcoin is going to do that someday, then you must understand the framework technically that got us here and why it might not ever go there in terms of price, and why the key to if it will or if it won't is this theory called hyperwave. We don't want Bitcoin to start another hyperwave, because if it does, it will come all the way back down again. We want it to form an S curve through adoption by not only individuals, but institutions and central banks. And the key to knowing if that is occurring or not, as far as I know, there's only one theory that describes it, and that's hyperwave. So this weekend coming up, we are doing a trading hyperwave 2-day webinar in which we are going to look at 5 hyperwaves that I participated in over the last 30 years. the crash of the US stock market in 1987, the crash of the Japanese stock market in 1989, the crash of the dot-coms and the NASDAQ in 2000, the crash of the mortgage market in real estate in 2007, 8, and 9, and Bitcoin. We're going to look at all 5 of those from the perspective of when did I see it using Hyperwave? When did I get in? When did I get out? How can you do the same thing? And the bonus of that, besides really understanding what it is, that it is a thing, that it keeps repeating, is that we are finding hundreds of current hyperwaves with individual securities, individual indexes all over the world. We are not going to go over all of those, but we will go in detail of trading those on a real-time basis today after we go through the 5 historical examples. And it will be in the form of not me lecturing to you, but Socrates and Leah and myself sitting there going step by step through what happened over the last 30 years, what happened with Bitcoin, right up to the peak, and why we are so confident that people say that I'm nuts by talking about the percentages that I do of where it's going now. And then bringing up example after example of things that are either in phase 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s of hyperwaves right now from the perspective of a trader, of Socrates being able to draw his own conclusions about what technical tools to use, what stops to use, and my perspective, which are not the same, and discuss it so everybody can hear what the nuances are of that. So that's it. That's the whole story. And thank you for listening. I am deeply embarrassed that I didn't let my partner, who knows these things far better than I do, on economics and politics and the fundamentals of things. But I just wanted to try to tie all of this stuff together. So those of you who take the time to listen to our vlogs don't feel like you're only getting pieces and parts of the whole. I just wanted to bring the whole view to you at one time in a short period of time. And thank you for listening to that. Now I am going to turn it over to Leah. Anything she wants to say will be very welcome.
Okay, well then I guess I'll say that it's 1:35, which means that I am 5 minutes late for my date with your wife, who's teaching me how to make sourdough bread from scratch today.
Wonderful.
And I know that your wife is going to kick my butt if I don't make that meeting. So sorry, clients, I didn't say that out loud. I will be back in an hour. That I will continue to process that, I think, as everybody else will. But thank you, partner. Everybody, thank you so much for watching.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.